Hello and welcome back. So today we'll be doing a top 10 type video, though not exactly a top 10 because we'll definitely see more than 10 guys here, but you'll come away from this knowing which centers you can target in different positions in the draft to get you goal coverage. So let's jump right into the data. This list is the top goal scoring centers ranked by 5-year goal per game average. There are definitely more guys than just this list, and we'll look at that in a second, but these guys will give you reliable goal scoring production for your team that you can count on. What you want to look for in this list is a massive deviation between their goal scoring production and their ADP. Now, this is mid-September, ADPs may change a little bit, but this can still be an exercise in spotting value and building your team around that. So, as we look at the data, the first thing that you notice is the top 4 guys on this list are the top 4 picks overall every year. And this is no coincidence. So Matthews, Draisaitl, McDavid, McKinnon, they do a lot of things well. Point production, power play scoring, shot volume, etc. But the main reason they're valued this high is for their goal production in addition to those things. So as you can see here, this top line is a 50-goal pace, and only one player has hit that over the last 5 seasons. That's Austin Matthews. Pretty obvious if you can, just watch the guy play. You'll understand why he's scoring 50 a year. This other green line right here is a 40-goal pace, so only 3 players have averaged, 3 centers have averaged a 40-goal pace over the last 5 seasons, and that's these 3 right here, Draisaitl, McKinnon, McDavid. And then this green line right here is a 30-goal pace cutoff. So anybody between these 2 lines is between 30 and 40 goals. But if you want that elite level goal scoring production from a center, it has to be bought in the first round, in the first 4 picks. This is where you have to get it. You're not likely to find a 50-goal scorer deeper in the draft, which is why you usually prioritize goal scoring early, because it's very difficult to find those guys late. It's also why you don't draft a goalie in the first round, because you cannot find a 50-goal scorer deep in the draft for the most part. But you can find a starting goalie deeper in the draft. And I mentioned that in my first video on this channel. It was do not draft a goalie in the first round. That's part of the draft strategy series, so you can check that out. It has its own playlist on my channel, and it's linked in the description below. But the next thing that I notice as I'm scanning this list and looking for value is Patrice Bergeron at ADP 83.8. So let's dive into that file a little bit. Now, Bergeron will be missing McAvoy, Marchand, Grzelcyk, and a couple of other guys for the first couple of months of the season. So I understand that he will be faded a little bit, but he does score .44 goals per game on average. That's a 36-goal pace over an 82-game season. And that's not necessarily elite, but it is very good. And what sets him apart from most other players is his 4 shot per game average, which ranks him 6th in the entire NHL. So he shoots a ton. He scores about 35-goal pace over his last 5 seasons, and his power play production is pretty good. .328 power play points per game production over the last 5 seasons. That puts him in the top 50 for that metric over that time span, so definitely ownable for power play production. And if your league happens to have a plus minus or a face-offs category, he's even more valuable. If you look at plus 24, that's his 5-year average. Every year he's about in that range. And then his face-off wins, this was last season, 61.9%, 991 face-off wins. So if you're in a points league that weights face-off wins for whatever reason, I happen to be in one of them. And I would just basically load up my entire team with elite center face-off guys to just, 1 point per face-off win is, I think, pretty nuts. Or I forget what the actual category was in terms of its point weight. But yeah, he's a great guy to have for face-off wins, plus minus. But if you don't have those, he's still very good for goals, and he's elite in shots per game. And then his power play numbers make him ownable as well. So this could provide a lot of value for your team if he's being drafted at ADP 83. And that's usually a good place to try to find value. And he has been dropping in drafts. I've been doing a couple of mocks, and he's sitting there even later than this ADP in a lot of drafts. That could change as we get closer to the season, but I think a lot of people are baking into that the health of Boston. So as we get back to the data, you'll notice right below Bergeron is Mika Zibanejad. And Zibanejad underperformed last year in terms of goal production just by a little bit. So he has a .43 5-year average. That's a 35 goal pace. Last year, he was only .35, so just under a 30 goal pace, but he is a second half stud, and in the second half of the 2021 season, he finished second in the entire league in goals per game with .724, which was just shy of a 60 goal pace. So if you're trying to draft Zibanejad at this ADP, that's pretty much where he should be going just based on his goal production, point production. He's on the top line in New York. He's on the top power play in New York, and he's the trigger guy on that power play as well, so he will get power play goals from that Ovechkin spot. But what you're hoping for in terms of value is that he will hit that pace that he was at in the second half of 2021. And he's hit that a couple of other times in the second half of the season as well. Not quite as high, but he is a back half type of player. Hopefully he can get off to a better start if you draft him this year. But I've seen some people kind of fading him a little bit, and I understand that logic, but at this point, you're hoping that he's going to be consistent for you in that 35 goal range. He's going to get you point production, some shots, some power play production as well, and then you're hoping for that breakout season because nothing has changed. He's still in the same situation he was in last year, and obviously that was very effective for the Rangers last season as they went to the conference finals. But again, everybody in this middle section is between 30 and 40 goals per season. So, the next guy on this list that has incredible value baked in is Brayden Point at ADP 116.5. So let's take a look at Brayden Point for a minute. And so his 5-year point per game average, goal per game average, 0.42. That's a 34 goal pace, and last year he hit that right on the nose. So he appears to be consistently there, and a lot of those goals will come on the power play when that unit is healthy. Now, keep in mind, Point missed 16 games last season, and then the year before that, Kucherov missed the entire season. So the power play hasn't been, functioning the way that it does in terms of getting in a groove and just cranking out the points the way that it used to do. But during his best season, Point managed 92 points in 79 games, including 41 goals and 20 power play goals. So that is likely his ceiling, and he's been pretty far from that ceiling recently in terms of point production, though he is still consistent with goal production. If you can get an average Brayden Point at ADP 116, that would be value. But if you can get anything close to that elite Brayden Point, that 92 point Brayden Point, then you just hit a home run because you swung for the fences deeper in the draft on a high upside player, and there's basically no risk to this file at that ADP. I'm not exactly sure why he's dropped so far in these drafts. There is a little asterisk next to his name or whatever in terms of listing him as an injured player, but nothing to write home about there, nothing serious. So I really don't understand why he's dropped this far in terms of his ADP. Could just be that people don't see him as an elite second round pick anymore, and he used to go in that second round range. But for whatever reason, this could be a really nice goal production value for you, especially if your league has power play goals as a weighted point category. But as we return to the list, what if you're looking to fade goal scoring early and or fade centers early, but you still want to look at goal production late in the draft? So for that, you want to take a look at Brock Nelson, Bo Horvat, Tyler Seguin, Mark Scheifele, or, as I just mentioned, Brayden Point. So if you look at some of these other guys, starting from the bottom, Brock Nelson, ADP 166. He had 37 goals last year. He might regress from that a little bit, but he's usually a 30-goal guy every season. So he's potentially deep value for goal production centers there. He's only single position eligible. Bo Horvat, I've gone to him a couple of times. He has pretty decent point production in that 0.75 range, but he does score at almost a 30-goal pace. He did exceed the 30-goal mark last year, I believe 31 goals on the season, and ADP 153 is a great place to get him. Tyler Seguin, he's a shot volume guy, usually above 3 shots per game, but he's being faded very hard, 162.5 ADP. This is all Yahoo ADP, by the way. Anders Lee's not a center, so he's a left wing in Yahoo leagues, but he's, same thing as Nelson, scoring in that 30-goal range pretty consistently. Mark Scheifele, 132 ADP, and he was a guy that was a 0.9 point per game guy, and he's in that range between 30 and 40 goals, so he could be value there. I think there's just a little bit of a narrative around him not wanting to be in Winnipeg or potentially being part of the problem. I'm not sure how much that's true or not, but regardless, this is pretty good value for him if you're looking in that range. So look at this list, absorb it. These are the less risky options for centers who will provide you consistent goal production. They have a proven track record. Some of them have some upside baked in. Some of them are overdraft candidates. Some are underdraft guys, and you can check out my videos on both of those topics in the description below or in the playlist. But by and large, these guys will still produce goals, and they'll still give you peace of mind in terms of goal production. But they're not the only guys that you can get for goal production as a center. So let's take a look at data from last season. As we move to the 21-22 numbers, we can have a new category to explain right up here. This top line here is a 60 goal pace. Obviously, Matthews, the only guy to hit that, 0.82 goals per game on the season. But if you remember back from my second half analysis video, he was averaging over 0.9 goals per game in the second half last year, which is just absolutely ballistic pace in the back half of the season. He's a unicorn. That's why he's in the top 5. Leon Draisaitl, the only 50-goal pace guy at a 0.68. Everybody between this line and this line is a 40-goal pace center. Duchesne, I talked about him in the overdraft candidates video. So if you want a little bit of info on Matt Duchesne, you can check that out. The timestamps are on that video, so you can skip right ahead to Matt Duchesne. But there's 2 other names on this list that we didn't see in the other list that we just saw, and that's Jack Hughes and Josh Norris. So let's take a look at those 2 files. So I've mentioned Jack Hughes in a few other videos, but there's a lot in his file to like, and he's still growing his game, and the Devils are still surrounding him with some talent to work with. So why would you own him? So goal production, a 43 goal pace last year over 82, but obviously he missed time due to a shoulder injury. Now, it's worth noting that in the back half of the season, when fully healthy, Hughes was scoring at a 52 goal pace, which was a bit surprising to me when I realized this. Another thing that surprised me was his shot volume at 3.36 shots per game, which ranked him 24th in the entire league. Now, what didn't surprise me as much was his point production at a 1.14 point per game over the entire season. But again, if we look at the second half statistics, he was scoring at a 104 point pace, which is what you would hope for out of a former #1 pick. But you usually see that kind of production when the player hits that mid-20s age range, not when they're 20 years old. Just for context, the guy taken right after Hughes in the draft, Capo Caco, has put up 58 points in his entire career, 157 games. So yeah, as a Rangers fan, not too happy about that. But the other reason you would own him would be for power play production, which is pretty good at 0.28 power play points per game. But I would expect more elite production out of Hughes this season, as guys who produce like he does in every other offensive area are usually between the 0.35 and 0.5 power play point per game range. I believe the main reason for the low power play numbers is due to coaching and not finding chemistry because of injuries. So if you remember last year, Hughes was injured, Hamilton was injured. Those injuries kind of crossed at different points. When Hamilton got back, Severson was the power play quarterback, so they didn't really find any chemistry on that power play unit. And then on top of that, the Devils fired both Mark Recchi and Alain Nasreddine, the 2 assistant coaches, and they brought in Andrew Brunette. And if you look at Brunette's time in Florida, they ranked 5th on the power play at 24.43%. So there should be a little bit of a bump in his power play production this season, and that would round out his file very nicely. Right now, Hughes is being drafted at ADP 96.2 in the 8th round, which is definite value for his upside. The only reason to stay away from this file is if he starts creeping into the 3rd or 4th rounds, or if you really want to stay away from his plus minus, because New Jersey is still not a great defensive team. Now, speaking of players that are producing on teams with bad defenses, let's talk about Josh Norris. So why would you draft Josh Norris? ADP 91, so same range as Jack Hughes. Definitely not the same upside as Hughes, but the exact same goal production last year at a 0.53 goal per game, which is a 43 goal pace over 82. Now, Norris also shoots a bit at 2.6 shots per game and had very good power play numbers at 0.34 power play points per game, good for 23 power play points on the season. of which 16 of those were goals, which ranked him tied for third in the league in power play goals with Matthews, Rantanen, Ovechkin, Duchesne, Reinhart, and Stamkos. So elite company for his power play goal production. And if your league is a points league that does have some weighting towards power play goals, this is a guy you can get in a nice ADP in the 8th or 9th round range, and he will, drive your power play goal production more than likely, because that power play is only set to improve with the additions they made in the offseason. And in addition to that, it might be worth mentioning that he averaged 1.19 hits per game last season, so he's not completely irrelevant in that category as well. Now, as we head back to the data, it's worth mentioning that you can gain access to the charts and visualizations I use in these videos if you sign up for my Patreon. So $3 a month gets you access to the charts. For $5 a month, you get that same access plus entry into a private Discord channel and Patreon messaging access, where I will essentially act as your own personal data analytics department for your fantasy team. So you come to me with your specific questions. I try to answer them as best as I can using the same tools I use for these videos. And thus far, I've been able to keep up with most of the questions about your teams in the comments section. But if this channel keeps growing, it'll become harder and harder to do that, and I'll have to prioritize my patrons at that point. So get in early, don't miss out on these resources, especially ahead of your fantasy draft, which is likely coming up in the next two to 3 weeks. Also worth mentioning, I do have a PayPal donation set up in the description as well. So these videos obviously take a lot of time and effort, and I'm still looking for a job as a data analyst. So any donations or patronage could potentially keep me running this channel, which will help your fantasy team. And it'll keep me from having to go beg and borrow and steal and try to get a job at some corporate office somewhere doing something for a pharmaceutical company that I don't care about. If you have some spare change, please consider donating or joining as a patron. That's the end of that chapter. So let's look back at the data. Now, one thing I notice as we look a bit deeper here, there's a massive disparity between Stamkos and Brock Nelson in ADP, but not necessarily in goal production. So if you look at Stamkos up here, that's really good pace, 0.51. That's obviously above a 40-goal pace. He's dual position eligible. He covers a lot more categories, but he's being drafted at ADP 20.5. Now, Brock Nelson's single position eligible, doesn't cover as many categories, and may be due for a little tiny bit of a regression, but he's being drafted at ADP 167, so a massive gap there. But if your objective is to add pure goal production, safe, reliable goal production, because he was on that other list at the bottom, if you remember correctly, you can find it deeper in the draft. And at that ADP, there's basically no risk to that file. You can drop him to the waiver wire if it doesn't pan out. Now, Nelson went off last year in terms of goals. He had 37 goals, but he's usually around that 30-goal pace, maybe slightly below. But he also does shoot the puck at 2.3 shots per game last year. So again, there's virtually no risk to that file. Now, as you look further down this list, there are some good plays in leagues without plus minus. So guys like Dylan Larkin, Clayton Keller, Anthony Ciu, they're all part of that good players on bad teams narrative that I've mentioned in a few videos. Obviously, Detroit will be better than Arizona or Chicago, but hey, bad teams need to score every now and then, and usually on those teams, there's only 2 or 3 guys that can do it. I've mentioned Clayton Keller in another video, boosting his own production, but he also boosted that of Nick Schmaltz last year. If you're wondering why the hell I'm talking about Nick Schmaltz in a fantasy video, you can go and check out that Overdraft candidates video where I mentioned a little bit more about this phenomenon. But basically, him and Keller kind of got a nice chemistry going last season, and they both had some bump in production. I would look at Schmaltz as a regression candidate, but if he has a hot stretch, he could be a desperation waiver play, mainly because of his attachment to Clayton Keller, who seems to be rounding into form as he's in that 24 age range where guys usually hit their prime. And he was a little bit shy of a point per game average last season. So if your league doesn't have plus minus, there are a couple of options you can go to there. And as we look for some more value here, let's take a look towards the lower section of this, below Clayton Keller, Jack Eichel. Let's talk about Eichel for a second. Now, I mentioned him in another video, the underdraft video, where he could potentially be due for a bounce back. But Jack Eichel is a prime example of why you don't pick up players in the first year with a new team. You probably also shouldn't draft a player undergoing major back surgery and trying to leave a bad situation. And that's exactly what I did last year in all 3 of my leagues. So was it dumb? Kind of. Was it brilliant? Not really, but it could have been. I got him no earlier than the 8th round, and I was banking on him returning when he did, and getting half a year of Jack Eichel at that position was better than anybody else who was available in that range. What I didn't plan on, Eichel breaking his thumb as soon as he returned to the lineup. I didn't know he was going to go to Vegas, so that did kind of bump things in the right direction, but I didn't know that or have any reason to suspect that Vegas would look like a B-52 returning from a bombing run in World War II in terms of their team health. So they had nothing going on in terms of team health. Guys were in and out of the lineup, and yeah, not a great file there. But if you look at Jack Eichel, he's a 30 to 40 goal scorer most years. He averages just under a point per game average over the last 5 seasons, and he's been above that twice in the last 5 years. He's been above a point per game average. So his point per game numbers are due for a healthy bounce. He was at a 0.73 point per game number last year. He's usually at a 0.95. So there is some value already baked into his file. If you look a little bit deeper at this file, what you're also getting is shots. So he's a top 10 volume shooter in the NHL. As you can see, 3.9 shots per game last year. And despite that broken thumb, there were several games where he was approaching the 10-shot mark in a single game, which is usually a good week for most fantasy players. Now, his power play point per game numbers were down a little bit last year, 0.23, so definitely room for improvement. But his career high in Buffalo was 0.42, which is a 34 power play point pace. So again, if you want a little bit more info on Jack Eichel, I did cover him a little bit in that buy low candidates video, and you can check that out in the playlist. There's a playlist with all 4 of those videos on my channel as well. But yeah, he could be a good value play. He's going around the 4th round range in Yahoo drafts right now. So that's pretty much where you would want to get him, and what you would be hoping for at that range would be for him to go off and have a great season, knowing that he has the skill set to be a Hart Trophy nominee as he was before he had that back injury. So as we look at the list again, you can see a couple of players who are categorized as centers by Rotowire, but are listed in different positions by Yahoo, guys like Adrian Kempe, Troy Terry, William Nylander. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these guys right now because we're sticking with centers, but there is one other guy I wanted to mention on this list, a guy who I haven't discussed that much on this channel, and that would be Elias Pettersson. So with Pettersson, why should you own him? His goal production is not necessarily elite, but it's remarkably consistent. So in the last 4 years, his goal per game numbers have been 0.4, 0.38, 0.39, 0.39, so pretty much exactly the same every year. And that 0.4 number is a 32 goal pace, which he hit on the nose last year. So in addition to that, his power play numbers last year were very good at a 0.33 power play point per game average, which was good for 27 power play points. And he is firmly planted on that PP1, and it's worth remembering he has a 102-mile-an-hour slap shot and can pick corners with the best of them. So he had 10 power play goals last year, which isn't elite, but it's pretty good. And he's been above a 0.3 power play point per game average every season except one. Now, as we look at his overall point numbers, they're good but not great. He started very strong in his career with a .929 point per game average in his rookie season. He had 66 points in 71 games. Followed that up with a .97 the next year for 66 points in 68 games. And then in 2021, he started very slow, 2 points in his first 8. Then he turned it on a bit for 19 points in his next 18 games. And then he suffered that serious upper body injury that ended his season. Now, last year, he started somewhat slow again, but turned it on in the second half, scoring 22 goals, 24 assists, 46 points in 38 games. That was good for 23rd in the league in terms of raw points in the second half, and 26th on a point per game basis. So very good second half. And I heard a rumor last year that he didn't have his usual blade or his stick pattern or whatever. Maybe he found his usual sticks later in the year. Maybe he adapted, or maybe it was the Bruce Boudreau effect. But regardless, things are pointing in the right direction for Elias Pettersson this year. In addition to that, 2.4 shots per game, so not bad in that department. And I found this amazing hit total. So he hits at 5.6 hits per game. No, I'm just kidding. He does not get any hits or blocks. He's about 170 pounds soaking wet, so not going to get you anything there. But everything else should be pretty good for your fantasy team in terms of category coverage and offensive categories. And right now he's sitting at ADP 52 in the 5th round. So that isn't exceptional value, but it's probably where he should be going. And there's no value baked into that ADP. But I don't see a ton of risk either. So a pretty decent option there if you're looking for goal scoring, power play production, and hoping for that breakout season from Elias Pettersson this year with the Bruce Boudreau effect. So you can look at this list one more time. Again, you can get access to these charts and visualizations in the description below. But that's going to do it for this look at goal scoring centers. I'll be doing more videos about category coverage by position, so keep your eyes peeled for those. If you want, you could do the generic thing and like, subscribe, and get notifications and all that, so you can beat everyone in your league to get access to this type of content. But I want to thank you again for paying attention and sticking with it till the end, and I will see you in the next one.